morning. That's a bit better. So my job is that of a simple job. Actually, I feel like I'm too little today when I looked at some of the panelists that are here. My job is to just tell people to come and talk, and that's it. And the only people we're going to introduce today is myself. And then the rest I'm not introducing because they are all known. So if somebody comes here and they're not known, sorry. But that's the only thing I'll do. But it was around 2015 that world leaders met at the UN, and they were discussing sustainable development goals. And part of the goal was, how do we create a framework by which we can solve these societal issues, social economic issues and economic concerns. And from there, the world developed what we all know as the 17 SDGs. And as a country, as a profession, we also have to get into that space and realize that we cannot be a profession that builds its own wood, if I may call it like that. We have to be a profession that plays a part. Every concern that is a South African concern is a concern of our profession. Every challenge that is a South African challenge is a challenge of our profession, is a challenge of business. So today you'll hear a lot from some of the most incredible people in this country talking about what can we do to ensure sustainability, what can we do to bring about governance, what can we do to ensure relevance of this profession. If I talk just for 2 seconds about the accountancy profession, if you're an accountant here, there's been times I've been embarrassed of being an accountant, I must say. One of those moments was at church. I was at church, and then the minister was busy, and then he said the following: what are the accountants doing in this country? I was sitting there thinking, wait, he's talking about me and all of those. And then he started speaking about all the spotlight that we've been under because of some of the scandals we've seen. But today we say, let's throw that away. And we are not going to have a talk shop today. We're going to give talks, yes, but we look at what is it that other businesses are doing? What is it that we can do to ensure relevance of this profession and to ensure that we are doing something as a nation? The other thing that is very important as well is we are not going to talk about businesses and all of those things. We're going to talk about individuals as well. Stephen, where are you? Where's Stephen? Where's one of our panelists? Where's Stephen? I don't see him. Oh, there he is this side. He said I put him on the spot when I told him one of the questions I'm going to ask him when we get to him is, what can I as an individual do to ensure that governance works? Because at the end of the day, we lose policies, we lose all these procedures because they are put on business, they are put on government. But how does it affect me as an accountant? How does it affect me as a cashier at a Pick and Pay, as a cashier at a ShopRite? We have to take it to that level. Did I say good morning? Yeah, I did. So that's perfect. So, by the way, my name is Robert. I did say that the only person I'm going to introduce today is just myself. My name is Robert Zwane. I work for SAICA, and my boss is here, so this gets to be slightly formal. My KPI is Chantal. I work for SAICA, the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, and our purpose as SAICA is defined as follows. It's contributing to sustainable economies by developing responsible leaders. And when we talk about sustainable economies, everything that we do has to go back to our economy, has to go back to not just our members, if I may say that. Yes, we are created by our membership, but one of the divisions we have within SAICA is called Nation Building, and the lady that runs it is right here in the corner. And many people, actually, if I talk about Nation Building, always say, you guys are big-headed. I am literally, but forget that. They say, you guys are big-headed. How do you call yourself Nation Building? What do you do? And we call ourselves Nation Building because we've realized that we have to leave an impact as a profession. We have to play that role. And I never really got to understand that until I started working closely with Chantal. It was in one meeting, we're sitting, and then we got a call, and she said, no, it was the minister. He needs help with something. I was like, okay. And then 2 weeks down the line, we get another call, it's the minister, another minister, they need help with something, and there's a project that we have now started to look into because of those conversations. We look at our pipeline, and if you look at learners, we start drawing or talking about the importance of mathematics, not from building an accountancy profession, but from building a country perspective. So it's very important that we look at things like that. So today, as we talk, as we engage about these matters, put South Africa Inc. as your first priority. Every question that you're going to ask, if I give you that opportunity to ask that question, it must be about how to better South Africa. If you look just the last few days, it's been scary being a South African. If you look just the last 3 days or so, I was in Brixton next to UJ, and I looked at town, city center, and it looked black. And it was scary with the smoke, the burning of things. But governance has been lost not just from a government perspective. Governance has been lost not just from a business perspective, but just from me governing myself. That doesn't exist anymore in this country. So how do we bring it back? And that is enshrined in our constitution. How do we get to live that dream? But before I talk a lot, Bonang, you have a lot to do today. You have a lot to speak about. So one of the most respected business people in the country, Bonang Mohale, is going to take the stand now and talk to us about a few things. And he's highly respected as a business person, was previously the CEO of BLSA, and today we're going to just hear from him for the next few minutes. And he said that he's going to give us some time as well to actually get to interact with him as well. So if you have questions, please do prepare those for him. But the most important thing that we're looking at is looking at unemployment sitting at close to 29%, 30%, and the biggest of that population being young people. So what does the future look like? Look at our energy crisis. Look at our education crisis. What does the future look like? Do we have a future? People are talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And one professor at one of the universities mentioned the following examples. At one of the plant that was, digitized, let me use that word. It had just above 1,000 employees before the whole digitization process. After that, it could run by just 30, 40 people. And therefore, for IR, is it something that we should be scared of? Something that is going to take our jobs? Or how do we embrace it?
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Eminence, Excellencies, I'm humbled beyond words that you all packed this room 11 to listen to these youngsters, including Prof, and I'm just a teaser. So let me tease you a little bit. And you can all hear me well?
Yes.
Let me ask the naughty one at the back to come in. There are some chairs in front here. There is no doubt that we are in a spot of bother. Yesterday we went to bed with Stats SA saying we have dodged the bullet.
Let's see.
This country of Rolihlahla, Nelson Mandela. Potential here, actual performance here, now has to feel relief that we have not entered a technical recession. But if you have been a South African for the last year, technical recession or not, you know that your discretionary purchasing power has been eroded.
I mustn't talk too fast.
That you are poorer today compared to a year ago. That to us, the recession is absolutely real. We are now sitting, hanging by our fingernails from Moody's, assessing our investment grade, and the only one of the three that has still kept it above investment grade. Because anything below will then be sub-investment or junk.
Where's that email from?
This
Nina?
wonderful, amazing country that has so much potential
Meeting. The one with the
wakes
4
up a
clippings.
quarter every quarter, leaping from one crisis to the other. And the proof points are there for all of us to see. We spoke about unemployment that was 27.6%, very high by global standards, and it went to 29.
Just the last two.
A real crisis.
Actually, it's just this.
Because the elements that were present in the Arab Spring are here and
institution
immediate.
point.
Why this country has not gone up in flames, we probably give it to the patience of our people. So some of those proof points without any degree of granularity. The economy is now on its knees. Young black graduates are roaming the streets hopelessly. Inequality has widened at the Gini coefficient approaching 0.6. We took over from Brazil probably for the last 5 years as the most unequal society in the world today. But also racism is at an all-time high. When people don't feel like they've got enough, they hoard the little that they have. And racial tension goes up, social instability manifests. But our public schooling has collapsed, where we are now having a strategic conversation that says 30% it's a pass, that you have to progress some learners. Imagine going to a clinician and looking at this clinician and saying, I wonder which 50% this one knows. But the last two, public health continue to fail the poor and the vulnerable. When I grew up, the best doctors were in the public sector because those were teaching hospitals. Today, the best doctors are in the private sector. And we can say the same about the nurses. Most of our people know that you go to hospital to probably go and die, not to go and get well. And this is the one that keeps me awake at night, and it should too. Lawlessness has now become an epidemic. And I don't say that lightly. When you ask the majority of South Africans today as to what keeps them awake at night, they talk about two things and two things only. They talk about crime and personal safety. All of us know somebody that has been a victim of crime. Last year, we had 35,000 hijackings. That's 3 hijackings every hour. Last December, we had 16,720 fatalities on our roads. That's 51 a day, every day on average. And it is of our own doing, because all of us, including Metro Corps and SAPS, they can see these walking coffins that are not roadworthy, and they're doing nothing about it. And the math doesn't add up. You can see that the math doesn't add up. Stats SA told us 3 weeks ago that there's now 58.78 million of us. So for good measure, we round it upwards. Let's say there's 59 million of us. 51% is female, so it's people that don't look like me. But the scary stat was that 18 million of these 59 million are on social security. And only 16 million are gainfully employed. So 16 supporting 18. You can see we are a disaster waiting to happen. SARS tells us that only 7.2 million of us are registered for PAYE and SITE. Only 7.2 million of us. And 83% of what SARS collected last year after refunds is 1.4 trillion South African rands. 83% of that came from only 2.3 million of us. Only 105,000 South Africans, taxpayers, and 1.5 million rand and above. Only 105,000. So you can see that the majority of our people are poor. They are not reaching their potential, not even their fullest potential. That there is exactly the same number of people unemployed as the entire population of Gauteng at 10 million. Why should it matter? Because Gauteng as a province of the Nile contributes 35% to our national GDP. followed by KwaZulu-Natal at 16 and Western Cape at 14. A lot of us think that Western Cape is bigger than KZN because they do such a good job of marketing it. So you have an entire province that is unemployed. But you also have 9 million young people that are not in education, employment, and training.
That's in his head.
My grandmother used to say, the devil finds work for idle hands. 6 million young people go home and they don't know their fathers. Only 14% of our children go to a home where there's both a mom and a dad. Now you can understand why we are in such serious trouble. So under those circumstances, I represent big business, business leadership. South Africa, 86 CEOs of the 400 companies that are listed on the JSE, 1.3 million of them who are in middle-sized companies, almost 6 million when you consider only the ones that are registered as SMEs. 53 in absolute number of these companies are responsible for more than half the GDP of this country. So it looks like our salvation moving forward has to come from business, not from government, because government led by President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa wants to do all the right things, but they don't have the money because the immediate past regime has eaten all the money. And I don't say that lightly. So when you don't have resources, it's like trying to go to battle with both your hands tied behind your back, except in the case of South Africa, both your feet are also tied together. So why do I say there is no money? Let's look at just the dispassionate facts. In the last 4 years, through state capture, we have lost 1.5 trillion South African rands. That's 2/3 of what it takes us to collect for the whole year. We lost it in just 4 years to state capture. See, state capture is very different from corruption. Corruption, by definition, is opportunistic. State capture is both systemic and systematic. It is about repurposing state-owned entities to benefit only the few. So we talk about the last 9 wasted years, where we estimate that on average we've been siphoning off about 100 billion South African rands just to the 2 Zupta families. I'm not talking about the 1.8 billion that was looted from VBS, and 33 of our purported leaders were beneficiaries. I'm not even including those. I'm not including the 88 that were mentioned in the Busasa deposition during one of the 4 commissions of inquiry. Your leaders, my leaders. I'm not even talking about those. So imagine what we could do with 100 billion a year in eliminating pit latrine toilets, and how many Michael Komapes and Lumka 5.5-year-olds would be walking around amongst us with shrieks of laughter rather than dying a sad, tragic, and regrettable death in a pit latrine toilet. And yet we are not a poor country. No, in fact, Africa is not a poor continent, but poorly managed. So what would happen had we just continued on the trajectory that we inherited from Rolihlahla, Nelson Mandela, who inherited a technically bankrupt country on the 27th of April, 1994. And in just 5 years, we quadrupled the size of this economy. In nominal terms, we increased the GDP by 2.5 times, just in 5 years. So the graph is pointing this way, upwards and forwards. And in an absolute world-class and worthy of emulation, he handed over to President Thabo Mbeki, who added up on that trajectory. And he gave us 43 consecutive quarters of positive GDP growth. We increased the number of students that go to institutions of higher learning from 7% to 11%. In absolute numbers, 500,000 to 1.2 million. We were adding 500,000 families into the middle class. We had hope. What would have happened? Not an actuarial calculation, but the back of the cigarette box calculation. Just a simple extrapolation. What would have happened? Instead of the 2007 precipitous drop that we witnessed on our way to Polokwane, and which absolutely was realized in 2009 when we were gifted with President Gedle Jacob Zuma, who then went on an industrial looting spree with absolute impunity. And all of us thought we were in a dream. So what could have happened if we just continued with that trajectory? So we did a bit of work at BLSA, and we said, our debt to GDP ratio, instead of being 63%, would be 40%. Had we just continued on that trajectory. In fact, 43% debt to GDP ratio presupposes that the economy would have grown only by 1 percentage point per annum. 1. Remember, the highest it was in December 2007 when we touched 5.4%. That decade, on average, we grew by 3.5%. The last 10 years, we have not been growing by 3. The last year, we clocked 0.8, 48 months, on average 1.2. Not enough to absorb the 180,000 young graduates that get onto the job market, often with inappropriate skills. So what could have happened? Unemployment would be 16%, not 29%. GDP would be 6, not 0.8 that we clocked last year. And you can start doing the math in your head. You'll see that we'll be in a different place. Would have taken a different trajectory. Would have banked R1 trillion South African rands into our fiscus. Just by continuing that track, not doing anything more, not killing ourselves, just maintaining the momentum. That's all we needed to do. So before I take your question or two, what then can we do as business? When I started, I said, government can't help us because they're broke. COSATU can't help us as labor because there are 2 million members. They broke into 2, and Ivan James NUMSA left with 800,000. In fact, today, when you look at the average age of union members is 45. The majority of them are in the public sector, not in the private sector. Private business employs 13.5 million people. Government in total, all 3 years, 2.3 million. Directly 1.3 million people. In Eskom alone in 2010, they used to employ 36,000 people. Today it's 48,000 people. At the end of July, when Pagamane Hadebe released his final results, that number was 46,662. Their Exco moved from a maximum of 20 to 80. Their debt went up to 447 billion, which means that debt is now permanent. Eskom has no chance of trading themselves out of that debt, apart from the fact that Eskom is now a crime scene. So labor can help us, government can, civil society can help us, because there are more people unemployed than those that are gainfully employed. Youth unemployment is 56%. So for me, I think our only salvation is big business. It's business. And therefore, if I had time, I would touch on the 6 big burning platform issues that business can lead on to ensure that we get ourselves out of this quagmire and we place ourselves on a different trajectory. And again, let me not unpack it, but just throw it at you and leave it to you so that maybe during questions and answers, we can unpack it a little bit. That which we don't have time to get to, as we break bread over lunch, I will be here so that we can unpack it some more. I think business needs to lead on land reform. Business, not COSATU, on land reform. Not on expropriation without compensation. On land reform. Because on land reform, there are 3 things. restitution, land restitution I'm talking about, redistribution, and land development. It's tragic that 25 years into democracy, we have not even completed a land audit because it wasn't important to us. 25 years into democracy, we don't know who owns which parcels of land for what good purpose. We don't. Of the 400 MPs that were in Kholisa's and Nelson Mandela's cabinet, and of all those departments, the one that has the smallest resources was the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, to show that we're not focusing on it. 25 years into democracy, the one that still does not have a permanent land judge today is this one. So how could they have effected land reform? Because they were not really focusing on it. So what we see here is a failure of execution of doing rather than an adequacy of policy. If I had time, I would tell you that our constitution is very explicit on expropriation without compensation. Section 25, Article 3A, the 8th line says, when conditions of fair and equitable have been adequately fulfilled, compensation can be down to zero. All this ANC-led government needed to do was to enact the appropriate regulations. That's all. And then focus on it and do it. For the last 9 months, we have been debating something that's already more than adequately provided for in the Constitution. Because our leaders were focusing on other things. Maybe on eating, not on service delivery. I think business needs to lead on transformation. You know, when you go to China, you're not confused where you are. The business looks typically Chinese. Chinese people run the businesses. They even speak in Mandarin. The culture is Chinese. Same in India and Japan, except here. So when you look at the BLSA 88 council members around the room, you could be mistaken that this is an outpost of Europe. It's still predominantly white and predominantly male. And if business does not lead on transformation, then all of us might as well just pack up our bags and go. This year alone, 350,000 South Africans have immigrated. For the first time in the history of this country, the majority of them are black. Because if business transforms, South Africa would have transformed. Remember I said they employed 13.5 million people, government 2.3. We must make this economy to be broadly reflective of the demographics. There are more women than men. There must be more women in the C-suite than men. And yet women representation in the C-suite is less than 24%. Black representation, 21st anniversary of the Employment Equity Commission, chaired by Tabia Kabinde, says black representation is now 15.1%. Last year it was 14.2. The year before it was 14.3. You can see we're not getting traction. Business must also lead in getting us out of this fiscal crisis, because we are in a crisis. Politicians don't like labeling things a crisis, but we are in a crisis. Business must lead because they can invest. Look at the skyline of Sandton. I mean, it's unrecognizable from 3 years ago. The big, huge she-gorilla called the Discovery head office, absolutely world class. Next to it, Bidvest Bank, and then Sasol. The tallest building in the continent is the Leonardo in the continent. It used to be the Carlton Center many years ago when I was growing up. It's being overtaken. So business, when they choose to invest, really we can do some amazing, wonderful, good things. The last three, and again, I will not unpack them. I think business need to lead in ensuring that we keep the few jobs that we have so that we can create jobs in large numbers. So that our people can have back their self-worth, their self-respect. There is no glory in waking up in the morning at 4 to be in the social security queue. All of us, we want the same things for our people. The last one. I think business must lead in creating our own timber, making our own future workforce. by focusing on this thing called education. You know, we are the only country in Africa that became free from our colonial masters. And we did not intentionally, purposefully, deliberately, consciously improve the quality of our education. We didn't. We are the only one that failed. Ghana's 57, Kwame Nkrumah, 10 years into democracy, they were already boasting about 80% literacy rate. Even Gabriel Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe, which used to be the breadbasket of the continent, 12 million of them, 5 million outside of Zimbabwe, the majority of them between South Africa and Botswana. Today, they boast of 94% literacy rate. What do we boast with as South Africans? The last FAIR study says 80% of grade 4 learners cannot read with comprehension. Not only because education matters as the surest way of transcending social classes, but because education, you can be born in the informal settlement of Alexander, 4 kilometers from here, only across the bridge. After 20, 23 years of studying, be able to afford a house in the leafy suburbs of Bryanston. Not because you won a tender, no, because you have earned it, you deserve it, and you can afford it. Education matters because when one steadily burns the midnight oil, one gains access to the domain of knowledge and wisdom, the world of meaning, the world that has no frontiers, the world that cannot be conquered without a persistent crusade. Thank you.